On July 19th, 2015, I found myself sitting on a plane heading to New Orleans for the annual NASFA conference. NASFA stands for the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. I was not invited to this conference, and I certainly wasn't a financial aid worker. I was going there as an activist with an organization called the Debt Collective. I was going down there to be a protester, a disruptor. Now, I had never been involved in any sort of activism before. I had a little idea of what to expect. I couldn't help but start questioning myself. Why was I here? Who was I to be protesting the system? Because of thoughts like these, I found myself thinking back to the events that led me up to this point. I graduated from the University of Arizona in 2002 with a degree in media arts and creative writing. Back in the early 2000s, I had a great experience at the university, other than parking, which was always pretty terrible. I originally went with the idea of pursuing a career in writing, but I soon found that I enjoyed video production as well. At the time, digital was taking the world by storm, and it was an exciting time to be learning it. In the early 2000s, credit hours were only about $90 each, so I was able to work 2 jobs and graduate with less than $5,000 in student debt. My plan after graduating was to continue my writing, but also to save up for my own digital film equipment and look for entry-level jobs at a TV studio. I left the school with a much clearer idea about what I wanted to do with my life. A year later, I had moved back to San Diego, and I paid off my student debt, and I was saving up for that camera. I had been looking for that entry-level job every day, but wasn't having any luck so far. Looking through the classifieds one day, I saw an ad for the Art Institute of San Diego. They were having an open house event, so I decided to go check them out. The campus was beautiful. The teachers I met seemed knowledgeable and friendly. The recruiters did a great job of showing off the incredible equipment and facilities they had to offer. They were also quick to boast about their insanely good job placement statistics for their graduates. Almost all of their majors had over a 90% job placement success rate. I was eager to continue my higher education and get the skills I needed, so I enrolled. I didn't understand how it could be so different from the university. The recruiter had given me the impression that this was a prestigious place of learning and that they were selective about who they allowed into the programs. But once I started classes, I realized they were letting just anybody enroll. It seemed that there were a handful of students like myself who were dedicated, but were vastly outnumbered by the recent high school grads who probably just thought this place looked more fun than the community colleges. The marketing did a great job of making the place look fun. Teachers were not required to have any prior experience, just some sort of industry experience in their past, and as a result, there's a lack of professionalism in the classrooms. One teacher routinely left his classes 30 minutes early every day just so he could avoid rush hour. It turned out there was now only one film teacher in the entire school, and they were not going to hire another. As a result, I was only able to get into one film class and never gained access to that incredible equipment that I saw. The curriculum was far more of what I call a buffet-style learning experience. Students were forced to sample from many different subjects rather than have a focus in any one area. Animation, life drawing, 3D modeling, web design. Fun, but so many classes that I had absolutely no interest in as far as a career. But I had to take in order to get the degree. Compared to the university, this place was a joke, a very, very expensive joke. After a year, I tried to drop out. The academic advisors stressed that if I dropped out now, I wouldn't be able to take advantage of the job placement services and valuable job leads they had. I also wouldn't get the alumni benefit of a lifetime's access to the school's equipment. Most of all, leaving would mean that I'd be on the hook for the debt without any degree to show for it. So I stayed. I didn't want the debt with no degree. Degrees open doors, right? I decided to make my own film appreciation club in an effort to reach out to other students who might want to learn and collaborate on the side. This led to the only great thing that ever came from my attending the school. I met Jay, the amazing woman who would eventually be my wife. She was the only one who kept showing up to the meetings. Um, she's amazing, she's talented, she's back there, and ever since then we've been inseparable. Um, the school's program did not prepare my wife and I to compete for the industry level jobs after graduation. When the loans hit us after 6 months, we were forced to work more hours at our current jobs in order to pay them. Jay was working as a Starbucks barista. I was working at Verona Casino, serving room service in the hotel. The only assistance we received from the school was doing some mock interviews and being sent job leads from Craigslist and Monster.com. Not really what I would call a benefit worth hanging around for. Even access to the school was made extremely difficult. Our cards stopped working the day we graduated. We couldn't get new ones. We needed advance permission from faculty to even enter the building. Alumni benefits were just another false carrot they were dangling in front of students. But we kept trying to improve our skills on the side. We sent off countless resumes, but never heard back. At first, we blamed our lack of success on the competitive industry and the downturn economy. If we had to live paycheck to paycheck for a while, that would be okay. We had each other. We would just keep trying. Things would get better. Years later, a job recruiter at a major studio would tell us how the industry really viewed art institutes. She told us they would put the applications from art institutes on the bottom of the stack. If they had too many, they would just dump them. The industry saw the school as a degree mill. With no entrance standards and little exit standards, it made sense. AI students usually weren't worth their time. 5 years after graduating, we finally got a start when Jay got an internship in LA. This was the first of 7 moves we would be making over the next 10 years. Eventually, I abandoned my own artistic dreams as she continued to find art jobs at game companies and large studios like Disney and Nickelodeon. But even with her success and my constant working, we were still only barely able to get by. We were now paying roughly $1,000 a month for our loans and barely making a dent in the principal due to the interest rates. Everyone around us seemed to also have student debt, so we just accepted that this was how it was supposed to be. One of the worst parts about having massive student debt is that we couldn't help but wonder what life would be like without the debt dragging us down. We could have saved responsibly, traveled, started a family, had a wedding, had a honeymoon, been able to take chances, maybe started a business. It hurt knowing that such a huge portion of whatever success we would find would be eaten up by debt from a terrible degree that neither one of us had ever profited from. I was working from home now, and Jay worked long hours at the studios. When she was home, we were fighting more and more over money. We were both struggling with depression and shame that was the result of the debt burden. One thing about shame like that is it takes the fight out of you. It was too painful admitting how bad our debt was. Early on, I learned to just pay it and then forget that it was there. I bowed my head and told myself that I deserved it. In the summer of 2015, I saw an episode of Last Week Tonight that was about student debt. John Oliver was laying out the corruption of the student loan industry as well as something called for-profit colleges. Some of the schools mentioned in this segment were ITT Tech, DeVry, Everest, Westwood, University of Phoenix, Ashford, and Argosy. These schools were preying on students using deceptive marketing and high-pressure recruiting tactics. I felt sick inside. Everything that was being described in the episode was exactly like I had experienced at the art institutes. Had my school lied to me? Was it possible that this debt that was dragging us down all these years was actually the product of fraud? It turned out that the answer was yes. Yes, our debt was the product of fraud. I did some research for myself, and I was shocked to find that the art institutes were not only for-profit schools, but that the company that owned them was currently involved in a whistleblower lawsuit where they were being sued for $11 billion by the Department of Justice. In the lawsuit, the whistleblowers clearly outlined how the schools were practicing deceptive and misleading recruiting practices, such as showing students false job placement statistics, exactly like the ones I was shown. In addition to fraud, the schools were also using illegal recruiting tactics, paying their recruiters by the number of students that they enrolled. This kind of deception was happening all across thousands of for-profit campuses for decades. I thought about all the students like me that had got into debt over false pretenses. I thought about all the students like me who had their dreams destroyed by debt, all because they trusted a school not to lie to them. Upon doing more internet research, I realized there were now petitions out against for-profit schools. There were now multiple undercover exposés by shows like 60 Minutes. There were groups forming on Facebook where students were sharing their horror stories, realizing how similar they were. We were all learning that we were not alone. Our pain and shame that was dragging us down was turning into anger and a need for action. And this is how I ended up on a plane in New Orleans, flying toward my first activism experience. Reflecting over my past like this had renewed my clarity and my purpose. I realized that this trepidation that I was feeling inside, it wasn't because I didn't believe in what I was doing. It was just because I was scared. Activism, especially when you've never done it before, is scary. And now the NASFA conference is huge. There are thousands of financial aid workers there. Every school sends them. To start it all off, we were hijacking their hashtags on Twitter. They had come down to New Orleans thinking they were just going to party it up on Bourbon Street and feel good about themselves. They didn't expect to be challenged. We were posting stats about the $1.4 trillion in debt that was sitting over the heads of 44 million Americans. We were posting about how access to federal funds was not the same thing as aid. I think I called more than a few of them financial debt enablers. They also had a policy challenge contest on Twitter. We hijacked that too, made a really cool image, and declared ourselves, the Debt Collective, the winner with our radical idea of free college. They were all very confused by this, but that was just the precursor of what was to come. The main event, and the reason that we all flew down there, was a big parade that the financial aid advisors were throwing for themselves. Yeah, it's obscene, right? So the group of us infiltrated that parade and started throwing out huge amounts of $35,000 bills and yelling things like debt for all, free money, as well as things like no cuts, no fees, education should be free. They really didn't like that. We also handed out fans that had proposals of free college tuition programs on them. Some laughed it off, others were pissed, but in any event, we were flying their jambalaya and it felt great. After the parade, we all met with various media outlets who were there to cover the story. I had never spoken to reporters before, so this was both stressful but also empowering. Rocking the boat was starting to get people's attention. While these events were amazing to be a part of, the biggest takeaway from New Orleans was meeting all of the other student debtors with stories similar to my own. We were almost all new to activism, and we were all learning how we could have power in numbers. Over the years, I have grown close with a number of them and consider them good friends. When I came home from New Orleans, I was fired up and ready to do more to fight student debt. Over the next few years, I tried to continue my activism in whatever capacity I could. I filed a formal debt dispute called Defense to Repayment with the Department of Education, which stopped my loan payments. Over 200,000 other students also filed them. I spoke on behalf of students at the negotiated rulemaking sessions for Defense to Repayment in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. I've done community outreach through door-to-door canvassing, and I even co-hosted my own radio show about student debt for a while. But there was one thing that I wanted to do more than anything else in order to really bring this thing full circle. I wanted to protest the open houses. Sorry, I get excited. They were still having them. I found out that they had been pushing their marketing to the max in efforts to get people in the door. In fact, now they were having them as often as every 2 weeks. For 2 years, I protested between 15 to 20 open houses at various campuses. It felt great to be standing up and telling the truth to combat the deception that was going on. People deserve to see the whole picture before they're expected to make such a huge decision. And I was not alone. There were many of us protesting open houses across the nation, spending their Saturday mornings on the curbs near Art Institute campuses. I knew that our presence prevented hundreds of potential students from getting into millions of dollars of debt. We spoke to students, we spoke to reporters. Even though the federal government had failed to hold the schools accountable all these years, the small group of us proved that we could hold the schools accountable. We shared our voices year-round. Yeah. On March 6th of this year, the Art Institute of San Diego announced that it would be closing its doors in 2 days. Students were blindsided, left scrambling to make sense of it all. I went down there one last time. At this point, no one on the staff cared if I walked around the school. In fact, most of them weren't even there. The ship was sinking, and they were too busy working on their own resumes, I guess. Once there were 50 art institutes in the US, now there's just 8 left, struggling to keep their doors open. Through all this activism, I've come away with resolved in the belief that we need to question student debt now more than ever. My life has been negatively affected by the debt, but I have met countless others who have had their lives absolutely destroyed by it, by a debt that should have never existed for them in the first place. 5 years ago, there was nobody talking about student debt cancellation or tuition-free college, but now it is a regular talking point of presidential debates. Now there are organizations like the Debt Collective that are calling for people to share their stories and go on debt strike. Now there are studies showing that cancellation could not only be a major economic stimulus, but also that the act of keeping the debt could very well lead us to economic ruin. I know that one day we will look back on this failed experiment called student debt that started in the 70s and wonder how we ever allowed ourselves to go down this road. Until that day, I'll be proud to say that I fought against it. The red square that I'm wearing is a symbol of protest of student debt. If you want one of your own, please come see me afterwards. I love to make red squares. My experiences made me realize that I had a voice and an obligation to share it. Once I was merely a product of society, but now I know I can help change society. Big changes won't happen unless we make them happen. I want everybody to realize that when they stand up and add their voice, change becomes possible. There is power in numbers.